David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, was famous for his chillaxing. It sounds like if Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister this week, he'll be chillaxing too, knocking off early on a Friday.
No, what Keir Starmer has said is that throughout his time as leader of the Labour Party, he's tried to protect Friday nights with his kids. Firstly, because he's a good dad. Secondly, his wife's family have Jewish heritage and Friday nights are special. What we've seen this morning is just the latest desperate attack from the Conservative Party, the party that brought you the biggest lockdown party in Downing Street, now talking about other people's work ethic. The stench of their lies and hypocrisy is even more overwhelming than the vomit they left for Downing Street cleaners to clean up. And like the Downing Street cleaners, if we're given the chance on Thursday, Labour will clean up the Tories' mess too. And as far as I'm concerned, this is just the latest example of why this circus needs to be brought to an end and why people like Maria Caulfield, who are out this morning debasing herself on national television, should also be removed at the general election. And I know she's feeling the pressure from the Liberal Democrats in Lewes.
This time next week, you could well be the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. What's first on the agenda?
Cutting waiting lists is my #1 priority overall. Obviously, we've still got ongoing junior doctor strikes. That's another example of Conservative failure. We've got to bring an end to those strikes.
How would you do that? Because they want a big pay rise. They say it's backdated. They say they've been underpaid for years. Is that fair?
They're right to say that their pay hasn't kept up in line with inflation. That is factually accurate and true. And they make a fair argument to say, look, we think that's wrong. What we've done this side of the election is be really honest with them to say, on Friday, if I'm the Health Secretary, I'm not going to be able to find 35%. But what we would be willing to do is negotiate on pay and also on the range of terms and conditions that junior doctors are suffering under. And I use the term suffering deliberately because I've been genuinely shocked and angry at the way junior doctors are treated in terms of placements, rotations. There was one case I was aware of a junior doctor whose partner had cancer. They had 2 kids and they were shown no flexibility at all about where that family was placed until there was a public outcry. That's not the NHS being a good employer, and junior doctors have a right to be angry about those conditions.
Do you really think junior doctors are going to change their tune just because there's a change of government?
No, I don't think they're going to change their tune, but to be fair to them, and believe me, I've had my run-ins with the BMA, and I'm pretty certain that if Labour wins the election, there'll be things we continue to disagree on. But they have been willing to negotiate on pay, and we just saw last week the settlement reached with Labour in Wales. I'm confident we can cut a deal. It's going to require some give and take on both sides, but we can see the costs now. More than 1 million delayed and cancelled operations and procedures because of strike action. More than £3 billion of taxpayers' money spent meeting the costs of the strikes. That's a heavy price we're paying for Conservative failure, and I'm not prepared to see this situation continue.
You mentioned Labour in Wales there. Let's look at the NHS in Wales, because as a percentage of the population, more people in Wales are on waiting lists. More than 20% of the population in Wales versus less than 15% in England. Waiting times for ambulances are higher in Wales than they are in England. There's been a Labour government in the Senedd for 25 years. So in terms of your record, Labour's record on the NHS, it's not great.
Well, right across the United Kingdom, the NHS is under pressure in every single part.
But in Wales, and of course, where Labour is running it, it's doing worse.
And of course, health is devolved. But what happens in Westminster does have a bearing on what happens in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And that's why, if you look at the last Labour government in Westminster, we delivered the shortest waiting times, the highest patient satisfaction in history. That's our record. We did it before. With the country's support, we will do it again. And in doing so, create a rising tide that lifts all ships, which is why even the SNP admit a Labour government would be better for Scotland than the Conservatives. And that's why, on Thursday, Scottish voters should send a government to Westminster with Scottish Labour rather than sending an opposition to Westminster by voting SNP.
We're talking Wales, by the way, Mr Streeting.
I know, but I've got to get Scotland in there too.
Well, we were talking to Stephen Flynn from the SNP, their Westminster leader.
Exactly, that's what I'm worried about.
In about an hour's time, we're talking to him. But look, sticking with Wales, on the one hand, people in Wales, whatever they can afford, get free prescriptions. But if they happen to call an ambulance, they've got to wait longer than they would in England. Where's the sense in that? Well,
you can talk about things that Wales isn't so good as, in terms of other parts of the country. When my grandmother was terminally ill and required care at home, I was really glad that my family were in Wales because in terms of community services, care in people's homes, I think the NHS in Wales is doing a better job than the NHS in England. So there are things where in every part of the UK, because health is devolved, there'll be things that some parts of the UK do better than other parts of the UK. We should be constantly talking and learning from each other. But there is this fundamental point, which is the choices made in Westminster do impact on other parts of the United Kingdom. And the reason why people should choose change with Labour, wherever they live in Britain on Thursday, is because not only will we cut waiting times and waiting lists in England, we will create a rising tide that lifts all ships, not least because the £2 billion of investment in Labour's manifesto that will benefit England will also deliver a financial benefit for people in Wales, in Scotland and in Northern Ireland.
Talking of manifesto pledges, you say everything is fully costed in terms of the ideas you've told us you want to do, although, of course, there's many things that we don't know you're going to do in terms of taxation. The IFS, Institute for Fiscal Studies, says there's still an £18 billion black hole in your plans. Where, and I asked Jonathan Ashworth, your colleague, this the other day, where are you going to get the money from? What are you going to do?
The reason I fundamentally disagree with the IFS's analysis is they fall into the trap. I'm afraid this is like the general groupthink in think tank world at the moment, that the answer to every single problem must be more money. We never talk about the £170 billion we already spend on the NHS and how it could be spent better.
How could it be
and I
spent
think that's
better then?
outrageous.
How could it be spent better?
Well, for example, because people can't get a GP appointment that would cost the NHS 40 quid, they end up in A&E, which costs £400, worse for the patient, more expensive for the taxpayer. Because we've got 600,000 people waiting for eye care on the NHS, we've got a situation where people are either getting progressively worse, more expensive to treat, worse outcomes for the patient. And yet we've got high street opticians like Specsavers saying, look, we can do some of that work with
Private
you and
companies.
for you.
So is this the deal? You're going to bring in more private companies to solve the problem of the NHS, are you?
I'm really happy to use private sector capacity to cut NHS waiting lists. And as Labour's saying today, you know, when it comes to waiting for eye tests, the government should have gone to Specsavers, and Labour will, because they've got that spare capacity that can do some of the tests and scans that will then enable people to get treatment faster. Management of conditions like glaucoma. And not only will that see people treated faster on the high street, it will also free up valuable NHS capacity to do the cases that only the NHS can do.
Specsavers is there to make a profit. It's a business.
Yeah.
So they'll be profiting off what NHS failure, will they?
Well, firstly, profit is not a dirty word in our country, and I want business to be successful. But secondly, I'm looking at this from both a pragmatic and a principled point of view. Of course, I want the NHS to be able to provide care when everyone needs it, because I think that's better value for taxpayers' money, and I think it's better quality. I've got to be realistic about the fact that if I'm the Health Secretary on Friday, the NHS is going through the worst crisis in its history, and we've got this two-tier system that's opened up where those who can afford it are paying to go private, those who can't are being left behind. And it's both pragmatic to use the independent sector because people will get seen faster. It's also principled because as a Labour politician, at the driving heart of my politics is making sure that working class people from backgrounds like mine get the same quality, the same access, the same treatment as people from wealthier backgrounds. And that's what a Labour government will deliver if people give change a chance on Thursday, because you only get change if you vote for it.
Less than 2 days to go now. Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Matt.